She signed the warrant, then wept. On February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed by order of her cousin Elizabeth I of England. It was not a decision made in haste, but one forged through decades of political rivalry, religious warfare, and dynastic fear. Mary had once been a queen of 3 nations, yet she died on a wooden scaffold, dressed in scarlet, the color of Catholic martyrdom. What followed was a scene so botched, so gruesome, that even hardened witnesses turned away in horror. But behind the axe was something colder than steel, the political necessity of erasing a blood relative to protect a crown. In this forensic exploration, we dissect the psychological torment Elizabeth endured, the symbolic theater of Mary's death, and the legacy of a queen forced to destroy her mirror image. This wasn't just execution. It was a sovereign sacrificing kin to preserve the myth of sovereign divinity. Subscribe for more unflinching histories of power, betrayal, and the politics of death. Tags: Elizabeth, Dear Mary Queen of Scots, Tudor history, royal execution, dark history, cousins in conflict, Queen vs. Queen, historical betrayal, political power, religious war. Script: She did not speak when she signed the death warrant. The parchment waited in silence, and Elizabeth's hand hovered above it, as if the quill itself resisted. She was not unfamiliar with executions. Her reign had ordered many, but this was not treason punished, nor rebellion silenced. This was blood, the blood of her grandfather, Henry VII, which ran through the veins of the woman whose name filled the warrant's lines. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, her cousin, her captive, her mirror. The ink settled into the fibers of the paper, and with it, so did a fracture, not only in history, but in something deeper, something Elizabeth would never fully name. She rose. The warrant left her hands. And hours later, another queen was summoned to die. The execution would not be immediate. The rituals would take time. But the decision had been made, or rather, the silence had broken. For 19 years, Mary had been both prisoner and emblem, held in gilded captivity across England's great houses, used as bait, threat, leverage. And for 19 years, Elizabeth had refused to confront the final consequence of Mary's presence. She would not see her. She would not release her. She would not try her. She allowed her to exist in a limbo where guilt could never be proven nor innocence acknowledged. But all limbos collapse eventually. The pressure of plots, the tremor of papal threats, the whispers of insurrection, they had become unbearable. And so, Elizabeth did what all monarchs do when fear outweighs kinship. She killed the thing that looked like her, but it was not murder in the way common people understand murder. It was statecraft. Legal, documented, advised, deliberated. And yet it trembled with something far older than politics, something primal, ritualistic, a woman killing her own blood to protect a kingdom built on her legitimacy, a cousin extinguished to preserve the image of virgin authority, a queen ending a queen not because she wanted to, but because she had convinced herself there was no alternative. And so the warrant was signed. And with it, the oldest bond, family, was undone in ink. They were born to the same inheritance, but not the same myth. Elizabeth Tudor and Mary Stuart both descended from Henry VII, grandfather to them both. One through legitimacy, the other through proximity. One through conquest, the other through continuity. In a different world, they might have ruled together, might have shared coronations, alliances, letters of sisterhood. But the thrones they occupied, England and Scotland, were not just nations. They were altars of opposing gods, one Protestant, one Catholic. And in the 16th century, religion was not private. It was war, written into skin and symbol, pronounced in blood and succession. Elizabeth was daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman declared heretic by Rome, wife by defiance, and queen by execution. Her birth was wrapped in scandal and preserved only by Henry's will and England's break from the church. Mary was the opposite, daughter of legitimate Catholic monarchs, born into acceptance, anointed under holy oil that Rome had not rejected. To the world, their rivalry was theological, but to each other it was personal, because Mary did not just represent an alternative faith, she represented an alternative Elizabeth, a virgin with sons, with clear papal backing, with no stain of illegitimacy. The Catholic world did not hide its preference. France revered her, Spain honored her, English Catholics whispered her name like a secret liturgy. Mary was a queen who had not had to fight to be called one. Elizabeth, raised in suspicion, crowned under threat, could not ignore what Mary symbolized, not merely opposition, replacement. And yet, they never met, never spoke face to face. Their lives unfolded in tandem, but never in unison. Their letters are preserved, sometimes warm, sometimes guarded, sometimes laced with warnings, but always at a distance. Elizabeth addressed Mary as cousin, as sister in majesty, but also as shadow. And Mary, imprisoned for decades, never stopped calling herself Queen of England, not just of Scotland. Her seal bore the title. Her letters to foreign courts used it freely. For Elizabeth, this was more than insult. It was usurpation in waiting, and so the bond of blood decayed beneath the pressure of symbols. They were not women to each other. They were ideas, each crowned as a counterpoint to the other, each breathing as proof that the other's claim was incomplete. And as time passed, their lives narrowed. Elizabeth into control, into chastity, into isolation. Mary into confinement, into desperation, into martyrdom. The cousin who had once ridden through French gardens in silk was now watched from every window. The queen who had once stood before Parliament, unshaken, now flinched at every papal bull declaring her illegitimate. In that tension, something broke, and it would not be broken by policy, nor by peace, only by death. One cousin would live, one would not, and both would haunt each other until the end. She crossed the border as a sovereign in exile, not as a traitor. In 1568, Mary Stuart fled Scotland after her forced abdication, seeking protection from her English cousin. She had been queen since infancy, briefly Queen of France, and remained Queen of Scotland in name. Now, with rebellion at her heels and nobles clamoring for her blood, she turned to Elizabeth as a fellow monarch, a fellow woman, a fellow Tudor by blood. What she received was not asylum, but arrest. From the moment Mary set foot in England, she was no longer a queen. She was a threat. Elizabeth never allowed her freedom, never met her face to face. Instead, Mary was confined in a series of great houses, Tutbury, Sheffield, Chartley, always remote, always watched, always shifting. The architecture of her captivity was elegant. Fireplaces, tapestries, privy chambers, the illusion of court. But it was a prison dressed as hospitality. She was guarded by nobles loyal to Elizabeth, her letters intercepted, her visitors recorded. Each room had ears. Every piece of paper passed through a second hand. For 19 years, she woke and slept beneath roofs chosen for her. She rode, but not far. She read, but under supervision. She dined, but never in freedom. She dressed always as royalty. Her meals were prepared with ceremony. Her household, though reduced, still bore titles. It was important to Elizabeth's image that Mary be seen not as a broken woman, but as a queen appropriately restrained, because to treat her as common would be to admit fear, and to admit fear would be to admit weakness. Instead, England preserved the appearance of grace, while isolating her soul entirely. Mary was meant to fade, not to fight. She was meant to grow older, quieter, forgotten. But she did not forget. She wrote constantly. Letters to Catholic monarchs, to the Pope, to English Catholic families. She never stopped calling herself Queen of Scots and Queen of England. Her captivity was framed as protective custody, but in practice it was slow political suffocation. Her son, James, was raised without her. Her allies fell silent or died. Her Catholic defenders diminished in Parliament. But still she remained, imprisoned, clothed, observed, and waiting. not for mercy, but for meaning. Elizabeth, for her part, refused to kill her. She feared the precedent. To execute a crowned monarch was to break something sacred, even for a Tudor. And more than that, Mary was her cousin. To destroy her was to destroy a piece of herself. And so she postponed, delayed, obstructed, for years. But every delay fed the myth. Mary the prisoner became Mary the symbol, and symbols do not stay contained. Elizabeth's advisors warned her. The longer Mary lived, the louder she became. The more dangerous her stillness grew. And in the quiet chambers of her captivity, Mary herself must have known. She would not die of age. She would not die quietly. She was not meant to survive Elizabeth. She was meant to complete her. But first, a plot would be needed, a paper, a cipher, something that allowed a crown to crush a cousin and still call it justice. The Babington plot was not the first conspiracy, but it was the final one Elizabeth needed. For years, Mary's name had circled through the undercurrent of English Catholic resistance. She was their icon, their hope, their shadow queen. Every rebellion, every rumor of Spanish fleets or papal edicts bore her image at its edge. But no act tied her directly to treason. She remained untouchable, contained but untouched by legal proof. Then came the cipher, the letters, the bait. In 1586, a young Catholic nobleman named Anthony Babington became the centerpiece of a secret plot to assassinate Elizabeth, incite a Catholic uprising, and place Mary on the throne. It was a fantasy, grand in its design, clumsy in its execution, but it was the opportunity Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, had been waiting for. His network had already infiltrated the conspirators. He did not just observe. He shaped. The plot was allowed to grow, to breathe, to write itself into treason. And then, at its height, it was collapsed. Mary, meanwhile, had been baited into correspondence. Her jailers arranged for secret messages to pass between her and the conspirators, hidden in beer barrels, written in cipher. She believed she was writing to allies. In reality, she was speaking to the crown. Walsingham intercepted everything, and then one letter arrived, the one that would justify everything. In it, Mary appeared to endorse the assassination of Elizabeth. Her phrasing was careful, conditional, but it was enough to accuse, enough to condemn. The letter was not a confession. It was a construction. It may have been edited after interception. It may have been deliberately provoked, but it served its purpose. Walsingham presented it to Elizabeth. The Queen hesitated, then froze. What had been suspicion now had ink, treason, written in Mary's own hand, whether knowingly or not. Still, Elizabeth delayed. She demanded more. She asked to see the original. She questioned the translation, because she knew what this meant. A signed warrant would not be a legal formality. It would be a fracture in the divine right of monarchs. Mary was not a rebel. She was a queen, a cousin, a vessel of royal blood. To kill her was to say, crowns can be severed, kin can be destroyed. And yet the state pressed forward. Parliament demanded action. Walsingham insisted. Elizabeth's counselors framed it as necessity, a wartime execution, a preemptive strike. But beneath every argument was a single plea: eliminate the Catholic threat, end the symbol, destroy the rival who had not stopped breathing. Elizabeth retreated into protocol. She ordered a trial. Mary defended herself with elegance and fire. She denied the accusations. She demanded to speak in person to the Queen. She was denied. The verdict, already chosen, was pronounced. Guilty. Sentence, death. But Elizabeth had not yet signed. Not yet. She waited. She listened to the silence after the trial. She read the letter again, and then she reached for the quill. The signature did not come easily. The page lay before her for days. The warrant had been drafted, read, sealed, and set aside. Elizabeth did not ignore it. She studied it, walked past it, let it rest on her desk like a sleeping weapon. It had been written in legal clarity that Mary, late Queen of Scots, was guilty of plotting against the sovereign and must be executed in the name of national safety. But paper is never neutral. This paper, in its silence, accused the woman who would sign it, because Elizabeth understood what it truly meant: not justice, not defense, but blood, kin blood, monarch blood, her own in mirrored form. She hesitated, not out of indecision, but out of knowledge. Once the ink dried, the world would remember her not as the Virgin Queen, but as the cousin killer, the last living Tudor ordering the death of another Tudor, not on the battlefield, but through bureaucracy. Elizabeth had always governed through distance, delegation, delay, silence. Her strength was not in impulse, but in calculation. But now she had been asked to collapse that distance, to make herself the blade, and in that request, something inside her recoiled. Her counselors pressed her. Parliament demanded finality. The people, stirred by rumor and fear, wanted protection. Her enemies abroad needed a message, but even now she sought a way to avoid responsibility. She asked for joint signatures. She suggested that her name be added later, quietly. She even ordered that the execution, once approved, be carried out without her knowledge. Elizabeth wanted death, but not the burden of command. And yet the moment came. In a small room, likely alone, she sat before the warrant. No audience, no trumpet, just the sound of the quill. The ink touched the page. Her hand moved quickly. No flourish, no pause. She signed as queen, but not as woman, not as cousin. And then she set the pen down and said nothing. She did not announce it. She did not weep. She did not celebrate. She simply passed the document into the machinery of state and stepped back. The warrant was delivered, but along the route she gave a second order, privately, verbally, to a trusted aide: delay the execution. She wanted to say she had signed, but not intended. She wanted ambiguity, a crack in the timeline, a gap wide enough to escape moral certainty. But the machine moved faster than she did. Her aide, fearing reprisal, did not delay. The council acted. The message went to Fotheringhay, and Elizabeth, when told it had been carried out, fell into what witnesses described as fury, then grief, then silence. She blamed her secretaries. She wept in front of them. She declared herself deceived, but the ink was hers. The death was hers. And history, like blood, does not wash away with denial. The message arrived at Fotheringhay Castle on the evening of February 7th, 1587. Mary Stuart was told she would die the next morning. There was no confusion in her eyes, no protest, only stillness. She had been a prisoner for 19 years. She had aged beneath the gaze of her jailers. She had heard the whispers of plots, betrayals, excommunications. She had watched her son be raised without her, watched Europe shift without her. And now she would die without apology. She asked for her chaplain. She was denied. She asked for time to prepare. She was granted hours. That night, Mary wrote her last letter. It was addressed to Henry III of France. She spoke not as a prisoner, but as a queen, signing with full titles: Queen of Scotland and of France, and rightful Queen of England. She declared herself a martyr, accused not of any crime, but of her religion. She forgave her enemies. She asked that her servants be cared for. She made no plea for her life. In the early morning of February 8th, she dressed carefully. Beneath her outer garments, she wore a crimson gown, the liturgical color of martyrdom in the Catholic Church. It was not coincidence. It was message. Even in death, Mary was staging meaning. Her clothes would tell a story her voice would soon no longer carry. Her body would become relic. The execution took place in the Great Hall. It had been transformed overnight. A wooden scaffold raised, black-draped stools arranged, witnesses summoned. Not many, but enough. Enough to confirm the state had acted, and acted cleanly. Mary entered at 9 a.m., leaning on 2 attendants. She looked older than her 44 years, but not weak. She walked with control, her steps measured, her gaze forward. She greeted the witnesses calmly. She declared herself innocent. She prayed in Latin. She forgave her executioners. Then she knelt. The blindfold was tied. Her lips continued to move, prayers mouthed without sound. The block was low. She adjusted her position herself. The executioner hesitated. Then he swung. The blade landed, but not cleanly. The first blow struck the back of her head, not the neck. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The second stroke severed the spine, but not entirely. A third was required. The head fell forward, rolling a few inches. The face turned slightly to the left. The crimson gown darkened around her shoulders. The prayer whispered before the blade had not yet faded from the room. One of her small dogs had hidden beneath her skirts. It crawled out after the execution, whining, blood on its paws. The witnesses did not speak. Some wept. Others left the room. Her body was wrapped quickly in cloth, placed in a coffin, and sealed. The ritual had been carried out, but it had not been perfect. The sword had hesitated. The cut had failed. The silence had broken. What was meant to be state precision had become something else, something intimate, ruptured, unforgettable. And Elizabeth, when told of the details, said nothing, not of the red dress, not of the dog, not of the third blow, only of the breach in her image, only of the shadow that would now follow her, that she, Gloriana, had made a queen kneel and bleed. She received the news with silence, then fury, then denial. The moment Elizabeth was informed that Mary had been executed, she collapsed into a cycle of performative confusion. Witnesses reported tears, shouts, accusations. She summoned her secretary, William Davison, the man who had delivered the warrant, and called him a traitor. She claimed she had signed under duress, that she had given no final authorization, that the death had been premature, unauthorized, against her will. But Davison had followed her orders. The council had acted within protocol. The warrant bore her name, her seal, her will. Her fury was not surprise. It was strategy. The Queen needed a rupture between action and blame. The execution of Mary Stuart was not a quiet affair. It reverberated across Europe. Catholic monarchs were outraged. The Pope condemned her. Philip of Spain prepared for retribution. Elizabeth's court, sensing vulnerability, closed ranks. They denied any misconduct. They punished Davison, imprisoning him in the Tower for following instructions too efficiently. Elizabeth did not pardon him. She did not thank him. She erased him, because someone had to absorb the guilt. But guilt is not administrative. It is atmospheric. It hangs in gesture, in avoidance, in the things never said. Elizabeth did not publicly celebrate Mary's death. There was no proclamation of triumph, no feast of survival. Instead, she vanished from court for days. She spoke of betrayal, of being misunderstood, of having her intentions distorted by men, and yet, in private, she had ordered the body to be buried with minimal ceremony. She refused to allow Mary's heart to be sent abroad, as the dead queen had requested. She denied the use of the title Queen of Scots in the funeral rites. Every detail was controlled, not to honor, but to diminish. And still, the image of Mary at the scaffold spread. Stories of her red dress, her courage, the bungled execution, the dog at her feet, these spread faster than state proclamations. They became legend. In Catholic Europe, she was already a martyr. In England, she became an absence, too dangerous to name, too powerful to dismiss. Elizabeth had not simply eliminated a political rival. She had created a symbol beyond her control. The Virgin Queen would never marry, would never name an heir, would never again face a blood relative with a claim to the throne, and Mary, in death, began a second life. In poems, in portraits, in relics. Her execution became a cornerstone of Catholic grievance. Her name became a warning. Her blood, spilled by a cousin, became a stain that Tudor ceremony could not cleanse. Elizabeth ruled for 16 more years, but never again would she move so slowly toward a signature. Never again would her guilt take the form of a warrant. Because Mary had taught her that paper cuts deeper than swords, and that blood once drawn never dries completely.